I never thought I could ever feel that flutter in my chest again. The kind that makes you believe there's still something good ahead. After that terrible crash that killed my wife Elizabeth and our teenage daughter, I shut myself off. Little Brandon, who'd just turned 18, must have felt my pain and decided he wouldn't let me drown in grief. He grew up too fast, learned to drive, so he could run me to appointments when I couldn't bring myself behind the wheel. Yet I lost all taste for life. I stopped going to the gym, abandoned my beloved guitar in the corner of the living room, and turned down every invitation that might have coaxed even a single smile. Almost 3 years passed before I felt ready to move toward something new. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was merely sitting on the porch of our Denver area house at dusk, listening to the wind chimes. One evening, a construction truck rolled into the yard across the street, and out stepped her. Tall, leather jacket, chestnut hair perfectly styled. Emily. I'd seen her on the neighborhood Facebook page. She collected books for kids with disabilities. At that moment I thought, here's true beauty, inside and out. A couple of days later, I bumped into her taking out the trash at our dumpster area. I stammered a greeting. She smiled like a warm spark of hope. I learned she was 28, worked in an architectural firm, dreamed of wandering London's Victorian alleys for inspiration. We spoke of books and music, of early morning mountain hikes. By our third conversation, I felt like I could breathe again. That very evening, Brandon called, asking why I'd shut off my studio lights so early. I lied that I was writing a novella about people finding themselves after loss. He praised me, said I inspired him. I forced a grin and ended the call, afraid he wasn't ready to see me as a man capable of moving on. But those fears vanished when he met Emily at a small friend gathering and told me he'd never seen me happier. It was the first time in years I believed I could be both a father and someone who knows how to love. We started dating. I planned little romantic surprises. A rooftop dinner in downtown Denver, weekend trips through Colorado's passes, a picnic on Lake Michigan's shore. We laughed, ate strawberries, listened to soft jazz, and she'd look at me like I was her whole world. In those moments, my old fears melted away. But behind our closed doors lived one silent witness, Brandon. He'd grown up. He was no longer that scared teenager, but tragedy forces maturity. He supported me, stayed close, yet I saw him sometimes glance at us with an unreadable look. I realized he hadn't decided whether he could accept someone so close as Emily in our family. Shadows of the past rarely leave a home completely. Every night when I walked Emily to her car and she hugged me goodnight, I caught something unsaid in Brandon's eyes. A brewing storm he didn't dare unleash. One Friday, I stayed late at work on a new case. When I finally headed home through rush hour traffic, I longed to see her on the porch, to light the lamps and wander through the rooms that once brimmed with hope. As I climbed the steps, though, I heard sounds from the bedroom, muffled moans and the rustle of sheets. My heart lurched, but I tried to calm myself. Maybe they were having a private moment. That's normal, I told myself, until I reached the door. It was cracked open. Inside, I saw them. Brandon, almost a man, and Emily, his father's girlfriend, entwined under the covers as if inviting me in. I froze, mind blank, limbs unresponsive. They hadn't heard me. They weren't waiting. In that instant, my world shattered. They had betrayed me together, trampling the fragile thread of trust I'd rebuilt since Elizabeth's death. No words were needed. The betrayal had happened right there, in the home I'd dreamed of filling with laughter again. I closed the door quietly behind me, stepped back, and turned away, stunned by the cold emptiness seeping into my bones. The night air brushed against me, sweeping away the last wisps of the joy I'd fought so hard to reclaim. The house felt alien, the world beyond disconnected. There was only one certainty. I could no longer move forward with them. I remember standing on the porch as if the moment had frozen in time. All I had left was the resolve to look ahead. Alone. The next morning I found myself at the lake where 6 months earlier Emily and I had picnicked. I sat on the cool stones, watching ripples chase each other across the water. I wondered how I'd ever believed her, why I let myself love again. One by one I tossed the ring I'd placed on my finger, our unspoken engagement, into the depths until it vanished beneath the surface, taking with it that false happiness. Returning home, I knew I had to face Brandon. I pictured the shame in his eyes, the weight of his deed bearing down on him. But our house was still our home, and I couldn't run forever. Inside, a silence greeted me. "Brandon," I said softly, and he emerged from his room, taller now but still my son, eyes rimmed with tears and fear. We stood there, father and son, and I didn't know where to begin. I could have screamed, could have demanded retribution, but all I could do was look into his eyes where our shared love and his guilt collided. "Dad, I'm sorry," he whispered. "I love you. I don't know what came over me." His words trembled, fragile as glass. I inhaled and managed. "You were my son, and now," I couldn't finish. "I don't know who you are anymore." His shoulders slumped. "I'm guilty," he said, head bowed. And in that confession, I sensed a raw honesty that I needed too, to understand what had happened and decide where we'd go from here. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured 2 glasses of water and placed bread and cheese before him, the same food we'd forgotten in the aftermath of loss. He stared at it as if seeing sustenance for the first time, then broke the bread with trembling fingers. "I need the truth," I said. "From the beginning. How did it start? When does it end? Why didn't you tell me?" He traced a circle on the table. "After you left for work one day, Emily came by. She said she'd forgotten her sketches. We talked about Mom, about Elizabeth. I was trapped in my pain, and she told me I deserved happiness, that Mom would always live in our hearts, but that I needed to move on. And then, it felt right, and we crossed a line." I listened, imagining how easily 2 wounded people could blur boundaries when grief lingered between them. But it didn't excuse betrayal. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and weighed my next words, whether to sever our bond or fight to restore even an ember of father and son trust. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, voice barely a breath. I looked at him, scared of losing him entirely. I took his hand and said, "I don't know, but I want to try, if you'll walk this path with me." Tears filled his eyes, and he nodded. We sat in silence as night deepened, unraveling every detail, every glance that had gone unnoticed. When I finally walked him back to his room, both of us exhausted but somehow less broken, I realized it was only the beginning of a different life, one where trust would have to be pieced together again, and where past mistakes would resurface time and again. That night I lay on the living room sofa, whispering into the dark, "I'll forgive you when I can believe again." In the kitchen, the faucet ticked like a heartbeat, urging me forward. The next morning, I called my therapist, the one I'd seen after the crash, and arranged for a joint session with Brandon and Emily. 2 days later, we sat before her, a calm room, soft armchairs, and spoke our truths without interruption. Emily spoke first, admitting her fear of losing me and her shame over what she'd done. Brandon followed, his voice raw with teenage pain and guilt. Finally, I shared my fear of ending up alone, unable to hold on to what I cherished. Outside, the sun was setting as we drove home in silence, each lost in thought, but bound by our shared journey. And in the days that followed, we tiptoed toward a new normal. I cooked dinner while Brandon set the table. Emily washed the dishes unasked. We learned to move together, a family shaken by an earthquake, but not destroyed. One evening in candlelight, Emily invited us into the hallway and opened a closet full of photo albums, snapshots of happier times. Fishing trips, Christmas mornings, school graduations. "I wasn't in these," she said softly, "but this is what I'm fighting for." Brandon's eyes glistened, and I felt hope flicker. Turning the pages, we remembered who we had been and who we could become again. We didn't pretend the pain didn't exist. We learned to live through it together. New traditions took root. Sunday breakfasts, movie nights, and one night, guitar in hand, we sang Elizabeth's favorite song. Though my career as a defense attorney demanded strength, I discovered that true power lies in vulnerability, opening your heart to those you love. Sometimes I caught Emily's determined gaze, and sometimes I saw in Brandon not a betrayer, but a boy willing to learn from his mistakes. We were standing at the threshold of a new chapter, without pretense, secrets laid bare, a long road ahead to rebuild trust. I still remember the afternoon I found Emily in the backyard, tilting her face toward the sun, as if trying to soak up forgiveness drop by drop. She'd been quietly building a small herb garden in the corner where Elizabeth used to keep her roses. "I thought if I could nurture something living," she said when I came up behind her, Maybe I can prove I'm worthy of being here. I knelt beside her and helped plant the last basil seedlings. The soil was cool between my fingers, and for the first time since that night, I felt something gentle stirring. Not quite hope, but the faintest promise of it. At the same time, Brandon and I were rebuilding more than our relationship. We were relearning how to be father and son. One evening, he invited me to his room to hear a new song he was writing on his guitar. His hands still shook as they found the chords, and his voice cracked on the high notes. But when he finished, the silence between us was warm instead of cold. He said, "I wrote it thinking of everything that's come apart and of what I want to put back together." I hugged him then, and we stayed that way until the streetlights blinked off outside the window. Work became both a refuge and another battleground. A high-profile case landed on my desk, just as our little family was finding its rhythm again. Late nights at the office reminded me how much I'd lost, and how much I still stood to lose if I let the past slip back in. One particularly dark winter evening, I stayed so late I almost slept under my desk. When I finally got home, I found the three of them in the living room. Brandon asleep on the couch, Emily reading by lamplight. I hesitated in the doorway, seeing them so peaceful. That sight, so simple, so ordinary, felt like a lifeline. I joined them, leaving my briefcase by the door, and we spent the rest of the night talking about nothing at all. Then came the hardest test of all. The day Emily's firm offered her a promotion that would require moving to Seattle. It should have been good news, her career deserved to flourish, but when she told Brandon and me, all of us froze. Moving meant starting over. New house, new routines, new schools. But it also meant moving away from the place where Elizabeth's memory still lived in every street corner. In that moment, I realized our forgiveness journey would demand sacrifices. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, weighing pros and cons, fear and excitement intermingling like coffee and cream. At last, Brandon looked at me and said, "If this is what she needs, I'll go with her." I saw in his eyes that he wasn't just being loyal. He was choosing hope again. So we made a choice. 2 weeks later, our Denver house was empty, save for echoes. We loaded our memories into boxes and hit the road, windows down, the radio playing half-remembered songs. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Emily and Brandon in the back seat, talking and laughing like they'd done 100 times before. In that moment, I understood that our story wasn't defined by betrayal or by tragedy. It was defined by our willingness to keep going. Together. And that's where we stand now, heading into the unknown. The wounds haven't vanished, and the future still scares me. But every mile we travel is another chance to write a new chapter, one where trust can grow as surely as the garden Emily planted, and where love, fractured though it was, can be pieced back into something stronger than before. We crossed into Washington at dawn, the air turning moist and pine-scented as we wound up I-84 through the Columbia River Gorge. Brandon pressed his forehead against the window, watching the cliffs rise and the river gleam below. Beside him, Emily traced the contour of my hand with her thumb, as if afraid I might slip away again. I gripped the wheel a little tighter, realizing that every mile of this move was a test of how far we'd come and how far we still had to go. Our new apartment in Capitol Hill was small, but flooded with light from windows that looked onto maple trees. Unpacking boxes of kitchenware and old photo albums, I felt a strange thrill. Here was a blank slate. Yet emptiness echoed in the rooms where laughter hadn't yet taken hold. I spent that first evening arranging furniture while Emily cooked pasta in a borrowed skillet, and I caught Brandon doodling on the walls of his bare bedroom. Little sketches of mountains, city skylines, and surprisingly, our three silhouettes together. The next morning, I walked to the local courthouse for my first day on a new docket. My hands trembled as much as they had that night I discovered their betrayal. But this time those nerves weren't born of shock, but of hope that I could finally build something lasting. I met colleagues who knew nothing of my past. I wasn't the widower or the betrayed, I was just another new associate. It felt both freeing and oddly alienating. When I returned home for dinner, I poured myself a glass of wine, and the noises of the city, sirens, distant laughter, the clang of a bus, reminded me that nothing here was tied to what came before. Meanwhile, Emily began her new role at the firm. Long hours, challenging projects. I worried she'd slip back into isolation the way I had after Elizabeth's death. But then one evening she surprised me by setting up a little art nook in the living room. Paints, brushes, and blank canvases. "I need a way to process everything," she said. Watching her swirl color on a once blank canvas, I thought about how we all need our own tools for healing. As for Brandon, he enrolled in a community college nearby and joined a weekend hiking group. On one trip to Mount Rainier's trails, he called me, voice bright, to tell me he'd reached the summit for the first time. "Dad," he said, "I felt like I was on top of the world, like I earned this." I remember closing my eyes as I listened, tears slipping unbidden. He was finding his own path, step by careful step. In the coming months, we marked small victories. Our first Thanksgiving in Seattle was awkward at first. I roasted a turkey for the first time. Emily overbaked the pies. We laughed when the smoke alarm went off. Those moments of imperfection felt like stitches in a healing wound. We sat around the rickety card table with a few new friends, neighbors we'd invited, and for one evening, our little family felt whole again. By winter, we'd developed new routines. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market on Broadway, Sunday brunch at a cafe where they knew our coffee orders and never asked about our backstory. One cold evening, I found Emily and Brandon curled up on the couch under a shared blanket, watching a black and white film I'd chosen at random. They looked up and waved me over. As I settled between them, I realized that the deepest trust isn't proven in grand gestures, but in these quiet invitations back into each other's lives. Still, shadows lingered. On the anniversary of the crash, we lit candles at a small memorial park near Lake Washington, each of us placing a single rose. I watched Brandon drop his into the fountain and whisper a word I couldn't hear. Later, I traced Emily's tears as she placed hers and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not to the memory of my wife, but to our family for everything she'd broken. I held them both, and for the first time, the ache felt tempered by something stronger than regret. The shared promise to keep moving forward. As spring approached, I stood on our tiny balcony overlooking the city lights and realized that our journey had become its own story. One of 3 people bound by loss, betrayal, and the slow, difficult work of forgiveness. We weren't naive enough to expect a happy ending in the old sense. We knew scars would remain, lines visible beneath our skin and in the unspoken hesitations between us. But we'd also discovered resilience. The ability to plant seeds in broken earth, to learn new songs when old ones no longer fit, and to believe again that family can be more than a word, it can be a choice, day after day. So yes, there is more to our story. We're still writing it, every sunrise and misstep, every shared meal and moment of silence. And I believe that, after all we've lived through, the most meaningful chapters are yet to come.